So good afternoon, and once again, my name is Stephanie Gadbois. I'm the Vice President of the Economic Club of Canada, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our luncheon today. Before we begin our program, it's important that we take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory and home of Indigenous people, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewas, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, lands steeped in a very rich history dating back many generations. The purpose of our acknowledgement today is to show our gratitude and our respect for their contributions and to recognize the role of treaty making in what is now Toronto. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Economic Club, we stand as Canada's national podium of record. We're the only nonpartisan national public policy platform that unites leaders, innovators, from across all sectors to discuss and address key issues shaping our country. Our foundation is firmly Canadian, yet our influence extends far beyond our borders. Through meaningful dialogue, collaboration, and a commitment for informed debate, the Economic Club continues to foster understanding and inspire action on the most pressing issues of our time. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, Leader of the Opposition, to our podium today. But before we hear from the leader, I would like to introduce Dan Davio, Chairman and CEO of Canaccord Genuity. Dan is going to deliver a few opening remarks. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Stephanie. Nailing my last name isn't always easy. It's a pleasure here to be at the Economic Club of Canada, and an honor to introduce my friend and today's speaker, the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Pierre has been a consistent advocate for free enterprise and a competitive economy, principles that resonate deeply with all of us who want the best interest of Canada and who believe in creating opportunity through innovation and hard work. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I've seen a lot of familiar faces here today. But for those of you I haven't met, I've spent my career supporting entrepreneurs and the innovators that invest in them. First as an investment banker for a huge portion of my career, and then for the last decade as the CEO of Canaccord Genuity, Canada's leading wealth management and investment banking organization in this country. Our business is built on helping ambitious founders raise capital and connecting them with financial backers and standing beside them through cycles as they become Canada's greatest companies. If we want Canadian ideas and jobs and prosperity to flourish, we must champion the visionary entrepreneurs who build them and foster an environment that helps them compete and win here at home and around the world. Pierre has consistently championed policies that support investment in Canada and business growth because he truly understands that a vibrant economy depends on ensuring that Canada is a great place to compete and thrive. He's also advocated for the importance of fiscal discipline and affordability, themes that matter to business owners, households, and investors alike. I always look forward to hearing what Pierre says, and have listened to him many times, but today's commentary is particularly timely, following this week's federal budget and the news that our country is facing the largest deficit in its history outside of COVID. So please join me in welcoming a Canadian leader who is focused on competitiveness, affordability, and growth, the Honourable Pierre Poilievre. Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephanie and Dan. Dan, you all know as an incredible entrepreneur who founded a great business, merged it with another one, leads 3,000 incredible employees, but of course, his biggest achievement is as a father, 6 kids. He took go forth and multiply literally. And recently he had a little one, baby Sadie, him and Morgan. And there was a tense moment after baby Sadie was born. She came out and the dreadful silence. No cry, no murmur, no nothing. And Morgan and Dan didn't know what was happening. The doctor said, "Don't worry, I know exactly what to do." He picked up baby Sadie and whispered something in her ear, and out came a roar, as if from a lioness. And the baby went on to cry for hours and hours without stopping. Later that day, Dan went to the doctor and said, "What did you tell my poor little girl that made her cry so much?" And he said, "I just told her that her share of the national debt is $32,000. So, but in all truth, the story of Genuity and ultimately Canaccord is the story of great Canadian enterprise. Not just Canadian business, but enterprise of all kinds. It's the story of someone who has an idea, takes a risk, mortgages his house, works all day and all night, wonders how he's going to meet the payroll, only to build something successful so that he can pay lots of tax to the silent partner, which is the government. But more than that, to create more competition and vibrance, to serve more customers, to finance more deals, to make it possible for factories, mines, pipelines, high-tech enterprises to get the upfront money that is needed to start. And that story bleeds over to the story of the worker who struggles through poverty to get a trade and get a job, maybe join the United Association of Pipe Fitters, who are represented here by Nathan Bergstand, and work hard building the country. We've all been blessed, those of us in this room, to grow up in the best country on earth, a country that we were raised to believe was filled with limitless possibility, that if we worked hard, we could have a great life, we could start at the bottom and climb to the top, that in this country, anything was possible, and that it didn't matter where you started, it mattered where you were going, it didn't matter who you knew, it mattered what you can do. And this country can be that again. In fact, my firm belief is with the resources we have beneath our feet, the land we have across our country, and the people who populate that majestic land, we should be the richest country on planet Earth, and that should be our goal. Think about it. We got the third biggest supply of oil. We're the fifth in natural gas. Number one in uranium and potash. We have the longest oceanic coastline, the most fresh water anywhere on Earth. We have by far the shortest shipping distance from the Americas to both Europe and Asia. We have the cold weather to reduce the cost of these massive data centers. We have the energy to power those centers. We have literally everything it takes to have the highest quality of living. And those kinds of resources and the economic data that flows from it means real things to real people. In such an economy, it would be easy for young people to afford homes. Single mothers would walk down grocery aisles and fill their cart with the things they want their children to eat, not the things that they can afford and don't have to turn back when they get to the checkout because the prices are too high. A country like the one I've described would mean that everybody would own a home with a yard, and every single night there'd be meat and potatoes on the dinner table. Those are the practical benefits that come from having a strong economy that produces low-cost but high-quality goods. That was the promise of Canada. But that promise is now broken. Look around you. Housing costs have more than doubled in the last 10 years, rising faster than in any other G7 country. In fact, housing prices have increased about 30% faster than incomes, the biggest gap of any OECD nation. We now have an entire generation, for the first time ever, that believes they will never be able to afford a home. This has never happened before. Food bank use has more than doubled in the last 10 years. One food bank leader said that it took a century and a half to get to 1 million visits a month. And in the last 5 years, that number has more than doubled to 2.2 million. So in 5 years, we have added more monthly food bank users than we had in the previous 150 years. To show the human cost of this, today a poll came out saying 20% of Canadians are not paying their bills so that they can afford to feed their families. We have malnutrition. We have 10% of our country that told a food bank survey recently that they are skipping meals sometimes for an entire day because they can't afford to eat. This, of course, is the result of a costly government. Costly government drives up the cost of living. And in the last election, Mark Carney promised that he was going to be different. The Liberal Party was, see, the lights are going out because the energy prices are so high. It's that industrial carbon tax again. But Mr. Carney was going to be the tight-fisted banker. He was going to be nothing like Justin Trudeau. He made so many promises. And yet, what have been the results of all these promises? First, he promised that he would negotiate a win with the Americans. By July 21st, he would have a deal. Still no win, still no deal, still no elbows, still no jobs. Here we are after he promised that he would, quote-unquote, invest more. This week's budget showed that investment has collapsed in all 3 fiscal quarters for which he has been Prime Minister. He said he'd double home building. Now his government agency, the CMHC, says home building will drop by 13% over the next several years. And he said that he would spend less. That was one of his 2-word slogans. He was after me for having 3-word slogans. His were just 2, so he was at least more parsimonious with words. But spend less. Did you see the budget? The deficit is 100% more. He's literally doubled the deficit that Justin Trudeau left behind for this year and for the next 5 years. The deficit, as Dan pointed out, this year will be $78 billion, twice the $41 billion that Trudeau had projected, $16 billion higher than Carney promised during the election campaign. And over the next 5 years, the government expects, and this is without any new spending in any of those 4 future budgets, they expect to add $1/3 of $1 trillion of additional debt. This will be the most costly 5 years, if it is allowed to happen, in any of Canada's history. And make no mistake, this is not due to the falling revenue from the trade war. It is due to increased government spending. Mr. Carney has added $141 billion of new spending measures. These are decisions by his government to add new costs that were not budgeted before, in exchange for which he promises to find about $50 billion of savings. So even if he keeps his promise to find the savings and to contain the spending at the aforementioned levels, that will mean a net increase in costs of $90 billion, which works out to about $5,400 for every family in Canada. And let's not make any mistake. Canadians will pay for this. The government has no money. It cannot give you anything it does not take away. Every dollar the government spends comes out of the pockets of Canadians. The more they spend, the more things cost. They only have 3 ways of paying for things: with taxes, with debt, and with money printing inflation. Either way, the Canadian people get the bill. And this promise-breaking budget by Mark Carney is the single most expensive for Canadians, who will be paying the price in higher food costs, higher home prices, and other increases in their cost of living. So today, I'd like to present you with the contrasting vision that the Liberals and the Conservatives have on our economy. Let's start with costs and with the fiscal well-being of our people. So we all agree, everyone agrees, that life is too expensive in Canada today. Housing is the most expensive in the G7, for example. Food prices now are prohibitive to the point where people are at food banks. So the question is, how do we make things more affordable? Well, our approach is to address the core problem, which is the government itself. When government runs massive deficits and prints money to pay for it, the resulting increase in the monetary mass bids up the cost of everything you buy. If you have an economy with, say, 10 apples and $10, it's $1 an apple. If you double the dollars to 20, and you still only have 10 apples, you're not twice as rich. It's just that each apple costs twice as much. The money supply has grown from about $1.8 trillion to $2.6 trillion in the last 5 years. That's a 40% increase in the money supply, during which time the economy grew by roughly 4 or 5%. So when you grow the money supply 10 times faster than the stuff that money buys, prices get bid up and everything costs more. Compounding that is the industrial carbon tax, numerous other hidden taxes, high income tax, and the cost of government is driving up the cost of living. Mr. Carney's solution to that problem is to create a whole bunch of new government programs to redistribute back money that he ultimately took away from families. Well, why not just reverse the damage the government did in the first place? Why not bring down the deficit by cutting bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, corporate welfare, handouts to fake and fraudulent asylum claimants, and other the money that the $26 billion that we spend on consultants. We could cut that back to the levels that it was at just 10 years ago, bringing down the cost of government. Why not bring in the dollar for dollar law, a very simple rule that you follow in your businesses and that seniors, single moms, and small businesses all follow, which is that every time you bring in a new dollar of spending, the government and its ministers should be obliged by law to find an equal dollar of savings. That would require politicians go into the line items of the departments to dig out the waste, optimize spending, and achieve value for money. By bringing down the deficits, we would no longer have to print the cash, and we could reduce the burden on the Canadian people that inflation has inflicted. That is the approach that we would take. But then there are specific things like food. There are at least 3 hidden food taxes that are already ballooning the cost of living. There's the industrial carbon tax, which applies on the steel and the fertilizer that goes into farm production. Every tractor, every combine, every bin is more expensive because of the industrial carbon tax. All the processing facilities, their conveyor belts go up in price. The fertilizer is hit with an industrial carbon tax. That then gets passed on to the food buyer at the grocery store. Then there's the food labeling tax, effectively a ban on single-use plastics, which means food spoils about 5 days faster, and it costs $400 more in groceries every year because of lost and wasted food. And then you have the fuel standard tax, a very well-hidden tax that is slowly increasing diesel and gas prices on farmers and truckers, which ultimately gets passed on to the people. We as Conservatives proposed a positive idea: get rid of every single one of these taxes to bring down the cost of farm production and therefore bring down the cost of food for Canadians. We believe low taxes on food. Food is an essential. It shouldn't be taxed. The production of food from the farm gate to your dinner plate should be tax-free. Next, homes. Why is it that we have such expensive homes? We have by far the biggest land mass on which to build homes. We have 10 times as much more land to build on per capita as the next closest country. So why is it that housing is more expensive by far in Canada than any other G7 country? Why is it that Toronto and Vancouver are the most expensive markets in North America? We're in the south of the border. They have more income, more people on a smaller landmass. In other words, more demand and less landmassed supply, and they pay 25 to 35% less for a home. The answer is we can't get housing built in Canada. Government blocks home building and then subsidizes home building. This recent budget, let me just read directly from Build, the Build budget commentary. Build is a local association, I think based out of Toronto, that actually builds homes. What was once a promise to deliver 500,000 new homes annually has now become a plan that will cost 100,000 jobs. Canadians are facing the prospect of a worsening crisis that will impact housing supply, employment, economic activity, and ultimately middle-class families. Now, the government in this budget only increased housing costs by keeping in place the hidden taxes that drive up the cost of producing a home, and by offering a tiny and circumscribed rebate that almost no one qualifies for. They say you give you a rebate if you're a first-time buyer on a first-time home. But first-time buyers don't buy new homes. They buy resales, because resales are more affordable. So 95% of home buyers will not get a penny from this rebate. You need to make the rebate available to all home buyers if it's going to count. And then we need to team up with the provinces and the municipalities to lower their home building taxes. In Ontario today, a third of the cost of a new home is just taxes. Another 20% is delays, consultants, lawyers, accountants, and others who don't actually swing any hammers or frame any housing. They simply add new administrative costs. More money from a new home today goes to bureaucrats in offices rather than to carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the homes. Mr. Carney's solution to too much bureaucracy blocking home building is to create another bureaucracy, a new government agency in Ottawa that is supposedly going to build homes. Only there will not be a single carpenter or electrician who works in these departments. It will just be more bureaucrats adding new layers of bureaucracy. What we need to do is cut the bureaucracy, eliminate all taxes on home building, and use federal infrastructure funds to incentivize municipalities to cut development charges, wait times, and free up land so that we can build more homes for our kids. Then we go on to the issue of economic sovereignty. We have, of course, as I mentioned, the most resources in the world, but we can't get them to markets. And the biggest market to which we get them has a near monopoly on our most precious and, just in terms of dollar value, our biggest exports, oil and gas. Now, why is it that we don't have pipelines and more LNG plants on our coasts? The answer, again, is government obstacles. Government makes it next to impossible to get anything built. You've got C-69, the No New Pipelines law. It takes 19 years to get a mine approved in Canada. It takes 14 years to approve an LNG plant. We have added one LNG plant in the last decade, while the Americans have added 10. Even though the economic case in Canada is much better. We have cold weather, which makes it cheaper by 25% to liquefy gas. It takes 11 days to ship to Asia from BC. It takes 20 days from the US Gulf Coast. In other words, we have a massive natural, geographic, and meteorological advantage, but they're building the LNG plants and we're not. Now, Mr. Carney's solution to too much government blocking our resource projects is to create another government department. So we have too much government blocking. We have a new government department that is supposed to help businesses get over that blockage. My answer would be that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Get rid of the bureaucracy that's blocking the projects in the first place. Let's repeal 6069. Let's legalize the shipping of Canadian oil off the northwest coast of BC, where it's already legal for Americans to ship oil between Alaska and California. We surely could do it better than them so that we can reach the 2.5 billion Asian customers who would be happy to pay world prices for our energy. Let's use C5, yes, a bill passed by the Liberals, to designate shovel-ready zones, pre-permitting to build LNG plants. We should aim to build 15 or 16 massive $40 billion LNG plants so that we can ship clean Canadian liquefied natural gas to shut down dirty coal-fired plants in Asia and ship it off to Europe so that Europeans don't have to buy from Putin anymore. Then we can turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in this country. In other words, get out of the way. And then there's the issue of investment. Obviously, we have, let's just address this issue of investment. Mr. Carney is saying that he needs to borrow money to invest. Let's be clear, this is not a new promise. This is precisely what the Liberals promised in 2015. They said they would have small deficits that they would use to invest and stimulate economic growth and productivity. 10 years later, they doubled the national debt, and what happened to investment? It fell by 11%. On a per capita basis, it's the biggest drop of any G7 country, the biggest drop in Canadian history. We have $15,000 of investment for Canadian worker, measured in USD, $28,000 of investment for each American worker, and $21,000 for each worker in the OECD. In other words, the Canadian worker is getting half the investment of the American worker and 30% less than the average OECD worker after all these deficits were put in place, supposedly to stimulate investment. And as I said, since Mr. Carney got in, investment has collapsed. Why is it that deficits don't lead to investment? Because very simply, everything comes from somewhere. When you borrow money out of the economy, you create an opportunity cost. The money that is lent to government for new excessive spending is money that will therefore not be invested in building a new factory, mine, pipeline, R&D facility. It's called the crowding out effect. And we saw it most prominently in Israel when they had huge deficits in the 1990s and investors could just sit back and buy bonds and get 6% with almost no risk. When the government reversed the policy, balanced its budget, the investors had to invest in productive enterprises, so they created the startup nation, the most technologically advanced nation on planet Earth. And now they have more companies on the NASDAQ than all European countries combined, even though Europe has 75 times as many people. In other words, paying down debt, balancing budgets actually requires investors to put their money to productive uses. If you allow huge deficits, all you do is cause malinvestment. You borrow the money out of this part of the economy, the productive side, and you spend it into this side of the economy, the unproductive governmental side. We don't need to redistribute more capital from private sector to government. We already have too much government as it is. We need a bigger, more robust, free enterprise business sector in this country. And that's what a balanced budget allows. And so why is the private sector not investing? Because our country is becoming increasingly uninvestable. With the second slowest building permits anywhere in the OECD, the countless obstacles to getting anything approved or done, and then the extremely high taxes, 50+% tax on our most successful people, very high taxes on energy, as I said, home building, on investment and work. That dissuades investment in our country. So my approach is very different than Mr. Carney's. His view is that we need more corporate welfare programs. So he punishes businesses with red tape and high taxes. Then he wants to create new government programs to subsidize those same businesses. So he blocks the business, then subsidizes the business. My view is, let's do neither. Let's stop blocking our entrepreneurs. For example, why not get rid of the capital gains tax for any proceeds that are reinvested here in Canada? That would create an economic boom. Why not have a big, broad write-off of money, profits that are reinvested in an enterprise in year one, instead of a tiny and carefully circumscribed one that is very hard to access? Why not, instead of giving out all of these new programs, why not use the money to cut taxes for all businesses? That way the politicians do not have to play winner and loser. And this is going to be a very interesting debate on the subject of stablecoins. The government did, to its credit, put a section in its budget book describing a plan in the future to come up with a stablecoin framework. Our view is that this must be a policy that leads to more competition and choice and lower costs for customers and vendors. It should not be used to further concentrate power in our payment systems or to create a central bank digital currency. Our view is that our system of payments is extremely slow. It takes multiple days to clear a transaction, and it costs 2 to 3% for the vendor. It should be a penny in a second to clear a transaction. And we will work with the government or with anybody in Parliament to make sure that the stablecoin framework that they're pushing forward leads to that extra competition and lower costs with a more smooth and competitive financial system. That is our approach on all issues. So what you really have as a difference between us, between the Carney Liberals and the Poilievre Conservatives, is this: they believe in adding new obstacles for all of you and then asking you to go to them and ask for a handout to help you get over those same obstacles. It's like Ronald Reagan said, if a Liberal sees something that moves, they tax it. If it keeps moving, they regulate it. And when it stops moving, they subsidize it. When in fact we should do none of the above. We should get out of the way and off your back. Get out of the way and let our resource companies dig mines, build pipelines, expand ports, ship goods. Get out of the way and off the backs of our home builders by making home construction tax-free and quickly approved. Get out of the way and off the backs of our farmers and food processors to drive more food production. Get out of the way and off the backs of our entrepreneurs so that they can invent more, create more, and achieve more. We should be a country that honors and liberates the energies of all of our workers to produce affordable goods. Because the single most important thing right now for our country is to make life affordable for our people. And the only way to do that is to stop creating cash and start creating more of the things that cash buys. With a big, open, free enterprise economy that rewards hard work, honors achievement, celebrates entrepreneurs and success. Because this should be a nation where anybody who works hard can achieve their dreams, where we are sovereign and strong and that we can stare down tariffs from any nation because of our economic strength here at home. A nation not of gatekeepers and grandees, of rulers and rule makers, of tax collectors and toll masters, but instead a nation of entrepreneurs and explorers, artists and adventurers, pioneers and patriots, workers and warriors, all united for the promise of this country that anybody who works hard gets a beautiful, affordable house with meat and potatoes on the dinner table every night, on a safe street, under our proud flag, united for our home and native land. Thank you very much. God bless Canada. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate you having me. Great to be with you.
So I would now like to introduce our moderator for our candid fireside discussion. Please help me welcome Michael Liebrock from the Stronach Group. He's going to moderate a short fireside discussion.
Well, thank you, Pierre.
Good to be with you.
Very
You're looking
good.
good.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
know,
Fresh.
Most people come into this world, they're born, but Michael was actually chiseled out of a big block of marble, and you can see what's the secret?
What's the secret? Dad bod. New dad
Wow,
bod.
it's impressive. I haven't seen a lot of dad bods like that, but anyway.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Economic Club for bringing us together at such a pivotal time in Canada's economy. And I don't know if you know this or if our guests know this, but the Prime Minister is actually just a block away right now.
We should invite him over. We have a great chat.
Some great ideas he might be able to borrow.
That's right.
But you know, Pierre,
Open
your
source.
event sold out faster and with more tickets. So for the economists in the room, I guess that's demand and the market has spoken. So maybe it's right
Absolutely.
here.
God bless free enterprise.
So Pierre, we're going to talk a little bit about policy, about politics and personal, but I want to start a little bit on personal. You and I are friends, but a lot of people in the audience are just still getting to know you. Your most important job outside of being leader of the opposition is as a committed father to Valentina and Cruz and a husband to the wonderful Anna. So my first question, you and Anna have been together for many years through campaigns, kids, and in the public eye. What has she taught you most through all of it?
Stay grounded. Definitely stay grounded. She comes from very humble beginnings. Obviously, she came as a refugee fleeing Venezuela, and they had to start from scratch. She was raised in a working class neighborhood in East End, Montreal, a tiny basement apartment, and she left home at 17, moved to Ottawa, worked at Best Buy, got a job in the West End of town selling electronics in English, even though she didn't speak English at the time. And that taught her how to solve problems and get things done. But she also reminds me that, you know, no matter how high and mighty we in politics might think we are, it's the strivers like her family that we're working for. And our mission is to unlock their potential and give them the best possible lives. So she keeps me grounded and makes sure that the ego is always in check. And I think that's a healthy thing for any politician.
That's good to hear. She sounds like she'd be a great campaign manager.
She's not she manages much more complicated operations, like getting the kids out the door in the morning and she produces an incredible magazine. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have,
a beautiful magazine, and she's a great writer, and she's founded her own businesses. So very talented, brilliant young woman.
Wonderful. And you said before that everything you do is about giving your kids and their generation the shot at the same opportunities that you had. What do you think has changed most for young families in Canada?
I just think the things that we used to take for granted are now out of reach, and the basic ambitions like starting a family, owning a house, having nutritious food every night, those are things that if you had a job at a university, you knew you would be able to do. But in the last 10 years, we've come to a place where it is literally impossible for youth to own homes in our biggest centers and increasingly even in our small towns. And that is totally unnecessary. I call it the promise of Canada. It's better than the American dream. American dream is kind of, you wake up from a dream, but a promise is something that is honored if you do your part of the bargain. Our youth today are doing more than their part of the bargain. They are working longer than probably any generation before them since the Second World War to get less and less. And I want to ensure that they know that they don't have to live like this. They can demand better from their country. They deserve homes, jobs, and hope, and that's what we're going to deliver for them.
Well, that sounds great. There's a lot of impediment to achieving that, and some of that you saw in the budget. And it speaks to how we grow and govern this country. So maybe we'll step next into some policy. Because after all the buildup that we heard, this Carney budget was billed as transformative, right? Once in a generation, a reset for growth, productivity, and fiscal discipline. But the reaction from business has so far been clear. The numbers don't match that narrative. Deficits are large and climbing, debt is getting worse, and the so-called investment agenda is just more rebranding of spending. So let's start there. If you were presenting your own first budget today, how would you make real fiscal discipline the watchword again, and how would you stimulate growth?
So the great Thomas Sowell said the number one rule of economics is scarcity. There's never enough to satisfy every want. And he said the number one rule of politics is to ignore the number one rule of economics. And that's what this government has done. And frankly, that's what all governments do, because they're always spending other people's money. There's an inherent discipline in a household or business budget because you're spending your own money or that volunteered to you by your investors. There is no such discipline in government. So the governments think with and. I'll have this, and this, and this, and this, and this, an all-you-can-eat buffet. I want to bring in an either-or discipline, where every time government brings in a new spending item, they have to match it with an equal savings. I call it the dollar-for-dollar law. The Americans brought this in the Clinton era, 1994. They had a balanced budget by 1998. They paid off $400 billion of debt. But as soon as that law, they called it the pay-go law, as soon as it lapsed, the American government went back in deficit, has not emerged since. So we have to reinstate scarcity within the government so that politicians have to make the same either-or trade-offs that single moms, seniors, and small businesses make every single day.
Right, it feels like there's just more and more debt right now for spending, right? They can just keep
right.
digging into debt, and what you're saying is the trade-off has to be there, which is an incentive that's not in government right now.
If there's a big hive of waste somewhere in a department, the minister today has no incentive to go and root it out. There's no political benefit to him. He's going to anger his bureaucracy, maybe some interest groups. But if you said to that same minister, you cannot bring a memorandum to cabinet seeking more spending unless you show up with an equal amount of savings, well, then he'd have to go into his department and find the waste. So let's impose the same scarcity on politicians that we impose, that is naturally imposed on every other creature in the universe.
Right, and it's the same incentives that exist in the private sector. It's just putting some incentives around constraint and scarcity. You've talked a lot about unleashing investment and productivity. The areas of this budget that have largely been sidestepped, beyond cutting spending, what's the single most powerful lever you'd pull to get people actually investing in Canada again? Is it regulation? Is it taxation? What are the big things you can move here?
Well, let's get rid of capital gains tax on any reinvestments in Canada. There's $500 billion of net investment that is left from Canada to the U.S. over the last 5 years alone. If you said to all the companies that have invested south of the border, bring the money home and you won't pay any tax, there'd be an enormous incentive for them to do it.
Huge. Yeah.
And then they'd have to also be able to do something with that money. So we need to go from 19-year approval times for a mine to 19 months. We need to go to rapid building permits. and other regulatory approvals. This should be the fastest. Why don't we set a goal? Bring all the mayors and premiers and the prime minister in one room and say, let's set a goal. Let's have the fastest building permits anywhere in the developed world, right here in Canada. I can tell you that would bring home a ton of investment immediately.
We've heard from the Carney government promises about hitting timelines, about things like pipelines and productivity, but those promises keep slipping. What do you think they're getting wrong, and how do you think you could do it better?
It's not clear they want these things to get built. I mean, Mark Carney's now been prime minister for 7 years, and he still won't say that he favors building another, feels like 7 years. I meant to say 7 months. It's been the same policy for 10 years. But he still won't say in 7 months whether he favors building an oil pipeline. He has not said that. He said he wants to use conventional energy. Well, you know, depending on how you define it, windmills can mean affordable, can mean conventional energy. So when you have a prime minister who's 7 months in, 7 months after promising to build things at unimaginable speeds, still won't say if he even supports the possibility of building an oil pipeline, it's clearly not going to get done under his watch. I would use the powers in Bill C-5 to set out a path and pre-approve a pipeline so that private sector could come with permitting certainty, knowing that they already have the approval to get it built. And let's get rid of all the anti-development laws and taxes, C-69, C-48, the industrial carbon tax, and the list goes on. Get rid of all of that so that even the projects that politicians have not identified explicitly can go together, go ahead in a free market. So
we've seen it again. We were talking about credibility in government projections earlier. We've seen it again and again in the last decade, actually, that governments, successive governments, including the one you mentioned, the budget this year being twice what it was last year and what it was projected. Spending projections are climbing higher and higher every year, and fiscal anchors seem pretty malleable, or at least they're not as anchoring as we once thought they were. And reliability because of that is slipping, and the market loses faith in the government and the government's own projections because of that. How do we bring back credibility to the government in terms of those projections so that the market and participants can better understand where this country's going?
Well, it's as simple as delivering on the promise. You know, they broke another anchor in this budget. The election promise the Liberals had was lowering the debt to GDP ratio, and yet the debt to GDP ratio will rise over the next 5 years. They originally said it would be a $10 billion deficit, nothing more, and you know, it went up to $300 billion. They said it would be a balanced budget after 3 years, and here we are 10 years later, and there's more deficit. So, you know, I'd love to give you a programmatic answer, but the answer is you just need a prime minister who will actually set a plan, stick to the plan, and then the market will see very quickly that they've got someone who's minding the store.
Moving on to housing and competitiveness, because these are national economic choke points, really. It's not just social ones anymore. If you were designing the growth agenda through the budget, and you talked a little bit about the reforms to housing and permitting, but what's the one reform that would make the biggest difference to getting things to actually work?
No tax on home building. Right there in Ontario, it's, I don't know. John Love's over there. How much is the tax on a home, John? Okay, it's a third. John Love says that it's the right answer, so I'm going to shut up now.
Well informed, yeah. Right, so you got to take the tax off the builders who are making the homes and make it easier for capital flow and capital formation. On top of that, you know, this has really caused, I said it was an economic choke point, but it's also a social choke point. There's a big frustration in the younger generation, and you see it bubbling up through different elections in the Western Hemisphere. Younger people feel frustrated, they feel locked out of capitalism, they feel the system's failing them. How do we make them active participants again in capitalism, and how do we share the, you know, we're at the economic club, share the idea that the benefits of capitalism can flow to everyone?
So I believe the fundamental problem in the Western world that's leading to the divide between rich and poor is not that there's too much free enterprise. The contrary, I believe that it's monetary expansion. Massive monetary inflation is inflating the assets of the super rich while destroying the purchasing power of the working class. I was at a very modest cafe in rural PEI, and I asked the lady, how much is that espresso machine? She says it cost 11 grand. That's a commercial grade, but it wasn't anything super fancy. Lady on the other end of the counter said, well, when I moved to Montreal in 1969, I bought a house for 9 grand. So she bought her house for fewer dollars nominally than the coffee machine cost today. And I said to this lady, how much did you and your husband make that year? She said, oh, we made about 18 grand. So it's about 6 months' earnings equivalent to buy a house in Montreal in 69, 70. Well, 1971 hits, and all monetary discipline was thrown out the window, or when Nixon closed the gold window, and governments have been printing money rampantly and increasing the money supply 3-4 times the rate of the supply of the goods and services money buys. This balloons government, balloons asset prices, but most importantly, it destroys the purchasing power of working people, and especially young people who don't have inflation-proof assets to protect them. And that is the fundamental reason why I think there is so much frustration in this generation. We've got to fix our money so our youth can have a fair shot.
Let's move on to politics a little bit, Pierre. And we can't talk about politics without noticing that Canadians now have a bit of a renewed patriotism, a little enhanced. And you can feel it when people sing the national anthem a little louder, and it's not just at Jays games. People are a little louder, a little prouder, and a little more feeling Canadian. We've come together in the face of U.S. Economic tariff threats and the imposition of real threats. What will the threat mean to Canada, and what are the opportunities that arise from it?
Well, look, 75% of our exports go to the United States. We can't ignore the fact that American capitalism is the most powerful economic force in the history of the world, and they're right next door. So our goal should have to be to come to some sort of a deal that will eliminate these tariffs, in exchange for which we offer a security partnership that will make both of our countries more safe and secure while protecting our sovereignty. It means that we also have to unlock our eastern and western ports, and maybe even northern ports, to hit other markets. And that goes back to unlocking our economy and our resources, which are by far our biggest exports. Mr. Carney has literally broken every single promise related to trade. There's not a single, despite 20 trips around the world, he has not reduced a single tariff line in any other foreign country. He was going to open all these foreign markets. There's not one tariff that any country anywhere in the world has reduced on Canada since he became Prime Minister. So I think we have to get away from all of the photo ops and the grand pronouncements and get back to the practical thing that needs to happen, which is that we got to get our resources out of the ground, on ships, overseas. That's how we respond to the unfair tariffs from a position of strength.
It's good you brought up Trump. I wasn't going to use the expression elbows up, but we all know that dominated the campaign. And there's a different approach now that he's taking. How would you handle Trump? He's a mercurial counterparty.
Well, first of all, nobody can control the President of the United States. It was wrong for Mr. Carney to claim that he would. He said he would handle the President, and I think we can all agree that it's been very much the reverse since he took office. We need to get a deal. We need to work with our American friends to get that deal. We need two-way free trade between our countries and to both of our benefits. And my offer to them would be, you trade with us more, we build a greater military that unburdens the Americans of our defense and ensures their northern flank is always more secure from threats by China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, or whomever else. That both our countries will be more secure, stable, and prosperous if we work together. But at the same time, we have to come into it from a position of strength. If we had 2 pipelines to both coasts right now, and we were moving 2.5 million barrels a day to Europe and Asia, I can tell you our negotiating leverage would be far, far greater than it is right now with the Americans knowing they have a total monopoly on our energy market.
Moving on to Canadian politics. With this budget, there's chatter around maybe another election coming up. the Liberals moving closer to majority territory with the NDP maybe abstaining. Are we going to have an election in your mind, or when's it going to happen?
Well, I'm better at predicting the past. It's hard to say. The NDP and Bloc both voted against our opposition motion. I don't think that we're going to end up voting for their motion on amending the budget. And so it will depend over the next several days what decisions are made by the various opposition parties. I mean, this really is a budget that the NDP and Bloc would be aligned with because it is a big spending budget. So I would not be surprised to see them vote for all of that spending. It's what they favor. It's their ideological predisposition. Our approach had been to demand an affordable budget so people could afford their lives. We didn't get that, and so that's why we are planning to vote against it.
The past election was one of the most competitive in Canadian history. Many thought you were going to walk out Prime Minister, but it didn't break your way in the end. What do you think went wrong, and what did you learn from it?
Well, first, I would point out that a lot went right. We got the highest share of votes since 1988 for our party. We got 2.5 million more votes and 25 more seats. Our vote went up dramatically. What happened is that the Liberal vote went up even more due to the consolidation of Bloc, NDP, and Green Party vote behind a single party. And so the lesson learned is that where we thought that getting 40% of the vote, or even 39, would mean a guaranteed majority government, we can't rely on that anymore. We need to reach more people, broaden our base even more. That means we need to be on more platforms. We have to showcase our incredible and highly professional team as a government in waiting. We need to be more present in both social and traditional media, and that's how we're going to grind out the extra support that we need. And finally, we need to reinforce what we did right. We won working class communities and youth that have never voted Conservative before by focusing relentlessly on affordability, fighting crime, harvesting resources. We do need to double down on an extremely popular policy agenda that got us the gains that we want.
Great answer. So our time is up, but just quickly before we go, rapid fire, before we wrap, a lightning round. 10 questions, one-word answers only, maybe two. Think more Bloomberg speed than question period. So one, early morning gym or late night email?
Late night gym, text messages all day.
Good answer. Double-double or double espresso?
A double espresso.
More stressful, question period or Toronto rush hour?
Toronto rush hour.
Agreed. If you could scrap one tax tomorrow, which one?
Reinvested capital gains.
Like that too. Most overused word in Ottawa right now?
Catalyze.
One word that describes Canada's economy today.
Expensive.
One word for what it should be.
Affordable.
Jay's World Series champion next year, yes or no?
Yes.
When people think of Prime Minister Poilievre, one word you want them to use.
Follow through.
What's something at home? What's something at home, a moment with Anna or the kids, that can make you completely forget about politics, even just for a second?
Valentina crawling on my shoulders and Cruz telling me Spider-Man stories.
Love it.
That's more than one word, though.
Yeah, it's fine. It's all right. You actually stuck to one-word answers mostly. Better discipline than the budget, at least.
That's true.
So we can also send this transcript to Mark Carney so he has some ideas, and that'll help. He tends to borrow, I've noticed. But ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Pierre Poilievre, Leader of the Opposition.